What happens when officers choose to target someone they assume is powerless? But then, just as their confidence peaks, they discover the truth. The man they underestimated holds their very fate in his hands. What unfolds next is a story that will leave you speechless. It was a muggy, overcast afternoon in Jackson Heights, where the heavy air clung to every surface like an invisible shroud. The streets buzzed with life, cars honking and people bustling about, all trying to outpace the oppressive humidity. Among this chaotic urban energy, Marcus Porter emerged from a small, unassuming diner. In one hand, he carried a neatly folded brown paper bag, the kind that held comfort in the form of a warm meal. Dressed in a tailored navy suit that seemed to catch every stray glimmer of light, Marcus cut a striking figure. His polished leather shoes clicked against the pavement, a sound almost rhythmic amidst the cacophony around him. He looked like a man on a mission, businesslike, focused. But his priorities that day weren't confined to the deals waiting for him in the leather briefcase he carried. No, something more immediate had caught his attention. Outside the diner, slumped against its faded brick wall, sat an elderly, homeless veteran. His clothes hung loosely on his thin frame, and his sunken eyes scanned the street with a weary detachment, silently pleading for acknowledgement from a world that seemed determined to ignore him. Marcus stopped, crouched slightly, and extended the bag toward him. "Here you go," he said gently, his voice warm and genuine. For a moment, the man hesitated, his hollow gaze meeting Marcus's. Then, as if the weight of kindness cracked through his defenses, he took the bag with trembling hands. "Thank you. God bless you," he whispered, his voice shaky yet heartfelt. Marcus nodded, a soft smile crossing his lips before he turned and walked away. These were the moments that grounded him, no matter how high he climbed in life. Small acts of kindness, simple, yet immeasurably powerful. Across the street, his black Jeep Grand Cherokee sat gleaming like a symbol of success. But Marcus wasn't the only one who noticed it. Parked a short distance away, two officers, Carter and Doyle, leaned casually against their police cruiser. They weren't just observing. They were hunting. Carter, lean and wiry, with a perpetual sneer etched into his face, nudged his stocky partner. "Look at that guy. Bet you anything that car's stolen," he said, his tone dripping with disdain. Doyle chuckled, his eyes narrowing as he followed Carter's gaze. "Yeah, let's see how long he holds up. Bet he folds in a minute." Unaware of the storm brewing behind him, Marcus approached his Jeep. He opened the driver's side door with practiced ease, placing his briefcase carefully on the passenger seat. His mind had already shifted to the tasks awaiting him, the meetings and plans. But before he could even close the door, sharp voices pierced the air. "Hands where I can see them," Carter barked, his tone laced with hostility. Marcus froze, his hand hovering mid-motion. Slowly, he turned, his face a mask of confusion. "Is there a problem, officers?" he asked, his voice measured but tinged with an undercurrent of tension. Doyle stepped forward, his hand hovering near his belt. "This your car? Got proof of that?" His question was more of an accusation. Taking a deep breath, Marcus replied evenly, "Yes, it's mine. My registration and license are in the glove." Before he could finish, Carter grabbed his arm roughly. "Don't move. We'll check for ourselves," he snapped. Marcus stiffened. His sharp mind immediately cataloged every detail, the officers' names, their body language, the murmurs of a growing crowd, and the smartphones pointed in their direction, ready to capture every second. What happened next was nothing short of a spectacle. Carter and Doyle tore through Marcus's car with reckless abandon, scattering papers, sunglasses, and even a pair of neatly folded work gloves onto the pavement. The crowd watched in growing disbelief. "Yo, that's messed up," a teenager muttered, his phone steady as he recorded. Marcus, though furious, maintained his composure. "Officers, you're violating my rights." "I've done nothing wrong," he said firmly. Carter sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Shut it. You people think you're untouchable." The phrase, "you people," hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. It was sharp, ugly, and undeniably deliberate.
But still, he didn't react.
Not yet. The situation escalated further when Carter, clearly enjoying the performance, pulled out his baton. With a theatrical swing, he shattered the Jeep's taillight, sending shards of glass scattering like confetti. The crowd gasped audibly. Doyle, not to be outdone, grabbed a crowbar and dented the hood with a sickening thud. "Stop it." "He didn't do anything," someone in the crowd shouted, their voice rising above the murmurs. But the officers ignored the protests, laughing as they continued their so-called inspection. Marcus stood there, fists clenched at his sides, the anger within him simmering dangerously close to the surface. But he didn't act. He couldn't, not yet.
Inside, his thoughts raced.
This wasn't just an abuse of power, it was a calculated humiliation, a grotesque display meant to break him. And Marcus knew, without a doubt, that every second was being recorded. By the time they finished, his once pristine Jeep looked like it had been through a war zone. Glass sparkled across the pavement, and the hood was so battered it barely resembled its original shape. Carter and Doyle wore smug expressions, seemingly proud of their handiwork. But the crowd's murmurs had grown louder, angrier. The tide was shifting. And Marcus? He stood tall amidst the chaos, a storm of determination brewing in his eyes. They had no idea who they were dealing with, or the reckoning that was about to come. When justice takes the stage, the unveiling moment. Papers and documents from Marcus's glove compartment lay scattered across the sidewalk, fluttering in the slight breeze like confetti left behind after a parade. It was a stark contrast to the grim reality of the moment. The two officers stood amidst the wreckage, laughing as if they were enjoying the best comedy show of the week. "Guess he'll think twice before showing off next time," Doyle muttered, leaning casually against the crowbar he'd used to dent the hood of Marcus's once pristine Jeep. His grin stretched ear to ear, dripping with misplaced confidence. Marcus stood rooted in place, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. To the untrained eye, his posture might have seemed calm, even detached. But inside, he was a volcano ready to erupt, each second of this humiliating ordeal adding more pressure, more heat. The crowd surrounding the scene could feel it too. They weren't just bystanders anymore. They had become witnesses, narrators, and amplifiers of the injustice unfolding before them. Phones were raised high, cameras capturing every smirk from Carter, every swing of the baton, and every insult hurled Marcus's way. Within minutes, the hashtags #JusticeForMarcus and #PoliceBrutality began trending across social media platforms. Videos of the scene spread like wildfire, drawing more people to the site. Strangers arrived, their expressions shifting from curiosity to outrage as they took in the shattered taillights, the crumpled hood, and Marcus's unyielding stance. Suddenly, the sound of screeching tires broke through the rising tension. A police cruiser pulled up, and out stepped Sergeant Reynolds, his sharp eyes scanning the chaotic scene with laser precision. His presence was commanding, his every movement exuding authority. The laughter from Carter and Doyle stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence. Reynolds's brow furrowed as he took in the damage. The Jeep reduced to a battered husk, papers littering the ground, and the crowd's glaring disapproval. "What the hell is going on here?" Reynolds barked, his voice slicing through the murmurs like a whip. Carter, visibly uneasy, tried to maintain his usual air of bravado but faltered. "Just, checking out a suspicious vehicle, sir," he stammered, shrugging as if the destruction surrounding him was routine. His smirk, usually plastered across his face, wavered. Reynolds's eyes narrowed, skepticism evident in his expression. He turned to assess the wreckage once more, the smashed taillights, the dented hood, and Marcus, who stood amidst the chaos like an unyielding pillar. The sergeant's tone was sharp, almost dripping with disbelief. "A suspicious vehicle? This? And what exactly was your probable cause for this so-called inspection?" Carter opened his mouth as if to respond, but no words came out. Beside him, Doyle shuffled awkwardly, suddenly finding his boots far more interesting than the situation unraveling around him. Before the pair could fumble their way through an excuse, Marcus stepped forward. His voice was calm, but the steel in his tone was unmistakable. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," Marcus declared, his words cutting through the heavy tension like a blade. "This is harassment, vandalism, and an outright abuse of power." Reynolds stiffened at the accusation. His eyes darted toward the crowd, where whispers had grown into a symphony of outrage. The sergeant wasn't blind to the gravity of the moment. He knew the weight of public perception, and this debacle was spiraling out of control fast. Turning back to Carter and Doyle, he gestured sharply. "Step aside. We'll handle this back at the station," he said, his voice carrying an edge that brooked no argument. But Marcus wasn't finished, not even close. His next words froze everyone in their tracks. "Oh, we will," he replied, his tone deliberate, each syllable charged with quiet authority. Taking a step closer to Reynolds, Marcus locked eyes with the sergeant, his gaze unwavering. "But first, I think you should know who I am." The sergeant's frown deepened. Suspicion and confusion flickered across his face. "And who exactly are you?" Reynolds asked cautiously. Without breaking eye contact, Marcus reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. The crowd watched with bated breath as he retrieved a sleek leather badge holder. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he opened it, revealing a gleaming badge and ID. The bold letters Internal Affairs Bureau shimmered in the sunlight, impossible to miss. The crowd gasped audibly, phones zooming in on the badge. The atmosphere shifted like a tidal wave. Whispers turned into roars of disbelief and astonishment. Carter and Doyle froze, their smugness evaporating in an instant. Doyle's grip on the crowbar slackened, and it clattered to the ground with a hollow, echoing thud. "My name is Marcus Porter," he announced, his voice ringing with a power that silenced even the loudest onlookers. "State Inspector for the Internal Affairs Bureau. And, up until about 5 minutes ago, today was your lucky day." The tension in the air became almost suffocating as Reynolds's face turned pale. His gaze darted between Marcus's badge, the crowd with their cameras still recording, and the shattered remains of the Jeep. Carter and Doyle, who moments ago had been the picture of arrogant confidence, now stood like deer caught in headlights, their faces etched with panic. Carter stammered, desperation creeping into his voice. We didn't know." But Marcus cut him off sharply, his voice like a whip. "Didn't know what? That I wasn't just another man for you to harass? That I wouldn't stand for this blatant abuse of power?" The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their anger transforming into support for Marcus. The officers, once so brazen, now looked like shadows of their former selves, their arrogance replaced by the crushing weight of accountability. Marcus, standing tall amidst the wreckage, had turned the tables completely, and justice had just begun its course. When the tables turn, justice finds its voice. The energy on the street shifted dramatically. Carter and Doyle, who just moments earlier had been brimming with arrogant confidence, now stood frozen, their faces pale with fear. Carter, struggling to find his voice, stammered, We didn't know." Marcus stepped forward, his every movement deliberate, his voice cutting through the suffocating tension like a blade. "Didn't know what?" he demanded, his tone sharp, yet calm enough to send chills through the crowd. "Didn't know that I wasn't just another black man you could humiliate without consequence? Or that this time, you'd actually be held accountable?" The crowd erupted into a wave of cheers, their applause and chants reverberating off the nearby buildings. Phones were held steady, capturing every second of the unfolding drama. Carter's mouth opened again, as though he were about to plead his case, but Marcus's glare stopped him cold, an unspoken command to remain silent. Sergeant Reynolds stepped forward cautiously, raising his hands in a gesture of appeasement. "Mr. Porter," he began, his tone strained. "Let's handle this internally. There's no need to escalate things further." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his voice turning icy and unyielding. "Escalate? Your officers did that the moment they decided to destroy my car for sport. And now," he added, his tone laden with righteous anger, "you'll see exactly what accountability looks like." Before Reynolds could utter another word, the screech of unmarked vehicles pulling up announced the arrival of Internal Affairs. The tension snapped as 3 plainclothes officers stepped out, their very presence shifting the balance of power. The leader of the group wasted no time, his voice firm and commanding as he addressed the disgraced officers. Carter.
Doyle.
Hands behind your backs. The street exploded with cheers, the crowd's voices drowning out the muffled protests of the now handcuffed officers. Phones zoomed in on their faces, documenting every flush of embarrassment, every droop of their shoulders as their humiliation played out for the world to see. Doyle muttered something under his breath, a weak attempt to justify his actions, but the words were swallowed by the cacophony of disapproval. As a tow truck arrived to haul away the remains of Marcus's Jeep, Marcus turned to address the crowd. His voice, calm yet filled with purpose, carried across the street with a commanding presence. "This isn't just about me," he began, his tone steady but impassioned. "This is about every single person who has ever been mistreated by those sworn to protect them. Change doesn't start in boardrooms or in scripted speeches. It starts here. It starts now." The crowd erupted once more, chanting Marcus's name as the energy shifted from outrage to empowerment. But Marcus wasn't finished. Turning back to Reynolds, he delivered the final blow with a precision that left no room for rebuttal. "Oh, and one more thing," he said, his voice heavy with significance. "I wasn't just passing through today. I'm here to evaluate your precinct's compliance with anti-discrimination policies." The color drained from Reynolds's face as Marcus leaned in slightly, his words sharp enough to slice through the sergeant's composure. "Congratulations, Sergeant. You failed." Reynolds opened his mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out. There was nothing left to say. Marcus had already turned away, leaving the sergeant to stand amidst the wreckage of his shattered authority. By the next morning, news of the incident had spread like wildfire. The precinct was placed under investigation, and Carter, Doyle, and even Reynolds faced immediate suspensions. Their names were splashed across headlines, their disgrace serving as a grim reminder of the accountability that Marcus had demanded. Marcus's story went viral, his calm but powerful stance inspiring millions. He became a symbol of hope, a reminder that change was possible when one stood firm against injustice. That evening, Marcus stood quietly in his driveway, staring at the wreckage of his once pristine Jeep. The emotional weight of the day hung heavy in the air. His teenage son approached, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Proud of you, Dad," the boy said softly, his voice filled with admiration. Marcus smiled, the corners of his mouth lifting ever so slightly. The fight wasn't over, far from it. But today, he had taken a step toward real, meaningful change. For now, that step was enough.